You may be on camera. If you're not comfortable with that, I guess now's your opportunity. So I wanted to just give a brief background about the Falls Church Way, who, the group that has put this together.
If someone's not comfortable being recorded and wants to write a question and doesn't want to be on camera, they can write it down and somebody else can ask it. If that's...
Great.
I will not ask it. I'm not comfortable.
I'm happy to ask.
Yes.
So the Falls Church Way is a loose coalition of community members who support the Falls Church City Schools and their vision for successful students by working to create and sustain open, collaborative, respectful, and trusting relationships among all school community members, parents, teachers, staff, school leaders, students, and elected officials. Falls Church Way is, as you probably know, a very new group. We just started in the spring, and we're led by a group of about 15 ambassadors who are people in the community who have diverse interests in, experiences with, and opinions about the things going on in our schools, and who have agreed to work together for the sole purpose of constructively furthering the goals of the group. Any member of the Falls Church City community who shares these goals is welcome to join the Falls Church Way, welcome to discuss becoming an ambassador, and get more involved. We have lots of materials in the back on your way out if you haven't seen them already. This is the third forum that we've put together as the Falls Church Way. The first one was at the American Legion in the spring. The second one was over the summer in one of the parks in the city. And tonight we're very pleased to have our two guests who are going to chat with us, who I'll introduce in a minute. And we look forward to having more forums, every few months or maybe even more often than that, with a variety of different formats and locations around town. So stay tuned for more details about our next forum. The goal for tonight is to have an interactive discussion. We hope and really know that this discussion will be constructive and civil. Over the last year, the school system has been through quite a lot. There was an election last fall, almost a year, 11 months ago, with contested seats for the school board and city council. There's been the Mount Daniel issue with approval from Fairfax County. There's been 3 new principals in our schools that started over the summer and this September. And of course now we have a superintendent who's leaving in about 6 weeks for another position. Not only have we had all that going on, getting us to where we are today, we have a lot on the horizon moving forward as a school district. We have hiring an interim superintendent, hiring a new permanent superintendent. We have the George Mason High School campus project and planning for that. We have the implementation and construction of the Mount Daniel School expansion project. We have overcrowding that's led to those construction issues in part. And we have elections in just over 12 months in the city for school board and city council positions. And of course, there's many other things going on system-wide, and hopefully all of this will happen without disruption to our wonderful schools, excellent teachers, and what most, or all of us care about the most, our individual kids and the individual classrooms that they're in, which continue to thrive and excel. So, with all of that, we are blessed to be joined tonight by Michael Ankuma, who is a school board member for how many years? 3 years. And Phil Redinger, who's been a school board member for 1 year. Almost 1 year. 10 minutes. I've already told them the 4 topics that we're going to talk about tonight that were on the announcement and invitation. And what I thought was we will go through these 4 topics, and they can each share whatever information or insights they want about that topic, and then we will throw it open to questions from the group on that topic. I will try to keep each topic to about 20 minutes so that we will be out of here at a reasonable hour in time to catch the end of the baseball game or the evening news or whatever it is. Or make birthday cupcakes. The 4 topics that we're going to discuss are the superintendent search, the budget and finances, the school facilities, and rebuilding trust and improving communications within the school community. So we'll begin with the superintendent search, and I'm looking at Michael, so I will leave it to you to comment if you want to start before any questions about where we are and where it's going. And
in a nutshell, I guess at our last meeting in open session, we had 3 presentations from search firms looking to walk us through that process. And so I would say after those presentations, we should be getting together again at some point to decide on who we pick, and if we have any questions, either invite somebody back or fill, or essentially settle on one and send them out. And these firms are, is it Hassel and Young, the VSBA, and then there's another one, the third one, BWP, I think it's called. So 2 are sort of commercial, private enterprise, private search firms, and then the other one is the Virginia School Boards Association, who helped us in our last superintendent search. So,
Is this for the interim and full search, or just for the full?
That's for the permanent.
Okay.
Because that's a process that we believe needs
A long
discussion, community engagement. So that's going to take us through probably the next 4 to 5 months.
Right.
At least that's I thought. Phil, anything you want to add to that?
So just a couple of things. There are, as you point out, there are 2 processes. There's the interim process and the full process. Interim process is very fast. There's been an ad out for a while. Today, I believe, is the closing date for people to put in applications. So as soon as this is over, we can move relatively quickly, I hope, to hire an interim superintendent. And that's not aided by any contractors. That's just a process of picking the best, most reasonable cost, best ability person to fill in, presumably for the remainder of the year.
Okay.
Michael talked a lot about the full-time process. Step one of that is going to be hiring a contractor of some sort. I know it's money, but I think it's money very well spent, because it's just these people are all expert in getting out there, and I don't think we get the pool of candidates if we didn't have someone to help us. Mm-hmm. There's a spectrum of costs. After that, I think we go through a series of quick phases. First phase is sort of community engagement to build what amounts to the job description or portrait of the superintendent, so all the qualifications you want. Then you build a job description out of that, recruit candidates, interview candidates, pick a candidate, and then announce the candidate. The one thing, and everybody we've talked to has said that the public engagement needs to be centered around the building of the profile for what you want, that you have to guarantee, if you want the best candidates, confidentiality for the people who apply. And having been a person who's been employed before and applied for jobs elsewhere, I fully understand that. So I just want to set the mark that people may want to see the final 3 candidates and be able to pick among them. I don't think that'll happen. The board hasn't formally decided that yet, but that's my personal view, and I have a sense that's the view of other people around the room. So those are kind of the 2 processes.
And it was also the recommendation of the 3 organizations that presented with us that it would be best to keep it confidential.
Going with a search firm. Sorry, glad you called on me.
it's all good.
Can you, going along with that, can you kind of say, when you go with a search firm, what kind of decisions does the search firm make on behalf of the school board but without really consulting with you? And what kinds of decisions and active participation does the school board do? Like interviewing, deciding who to call back and at what point, like how much weeding do they do and you don't even see it?
Well, from the presentations that we saw, and first off, the school board makes all the decisions. The search firm is there to collect things, to get additional people, to maybe do some further collection of information, to check, do background checks and those sorts of things, and to help facilitate the public discussion. When the resumes come in, I think all 3 of them plan to sort of identify, based on what you've selected, who the top candidates are. But I know at least one of the firms, and I think maybe all three of them, said, you get all of them. So if you want more information on them, you can do it. And all the decisions are made and have to be made by the school board, because we're accountable to all of you for the decisions that we make. And nobody wants, I think, a contractor to make those decisions for them, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's helpful, thank you.
Is it typical to engage 3 headhunters to find a position, to fill a position?
They're picking one of them, right?
You're
Right,
picking-
so to clarify, I think, if I can, because I was at the public meeting, they were interviewing 3 headhunters to choose one headhunter, if headhunter is the right word. Consultants or search firms to eventually hire one to go forward with the process. For more background, can you discuss a little bit about that? What the timeline is for bringing on the new interim superintendent, overlap before Dr. Jones departs, and then ultimately when, ideally, or when the general timeline may be for the new permanent superintendent being hired and starting?
I believe the job posting said it would appear that the period for the interim superintendent would be from November 15th through June 30th. So essentially what we're trying to do is between now and then try to identify the candidates. Today's the cutoff, as Phil said. So hopefully at our next meeting we probably get a chance to look at what we've received in terms of resumes and cover letters, and then decide from there. But the idea is to get that person in and negotiate with them, come to some agreement as quickly as possible, so we sort of meet those deadlines. Because we would like that overlap with Dr. Jones before she goes.
So I'd add a couple of things. I mean, I'd like to get an interim on as quickly as possible, either for more of an overlap period, or if we have someone on board, and as I said on a public record in one meeting, that if we had a person on board and they were going to be here for the rest of the year, then I'd be comfortable with telling to Dr. Jones if she wanted to go and start her duties early, that would be okay to do, because she's made the decision she's going somewhere else, and I think it's better to make changes quickly when that happens. But at the same time, we're also working on building a budget, and I know a lot of other board members are concerned about all of those sorts of things, and all of those are extremely valid. But I'd like to get somebody on board as an interim as quickly as possible, and then I think we can make a decision about how long of a period of overlap is. Dr. Jones, I think her formal date or 90-day notice for departure was December 5th. So the longer we have in front of that, the better. And I see, except for talking to people, very little barrier to moving quickly, either to pick a search firm, because we've seen the presentations now, or to bring on an interim superintendent, because we've got the resumes now. It's just the process of doing the interviews and having the discussions and making sure you get a good fit for the schools.
I think I saw a question over here.
Are any of those, the 3 search firms, engaged in the Fairfax County superintendent search?
Good question.
Good question. Very good question.
I actually don't know the answer to that question. If it's anybody, it's probably Hazard Young. Fairfax County, I doubt, would use the SBA because they're one of the 10 largest school systems in the whole country, and so they're going to use a bells and whistles search firm.
I think that would be a good question to know the answer to,
I think you're
since
quite
we'd
right.
be competing against them.
I agree.
The basis of that question?
Because I wouldn't want us to be, I wouldn't want the search firm to be pulling candidates that could potentially come to our school and then they place them in Fairfax County instead. It could be a competitive.
But I think
conflict
like
of
a
interest.
person who'd be interested in a job like a Fairfax County may not be interested in Falls Church. That's a massive system, so I don't know.
I certainly don't know. It would be a good fact to know regardless of whether or not it is determinative.
That's Rohini, did you have a
Yeah,
question?
my question was, for the interim job applications, who's receiving those? Since a normal HR, like if you're hiring teachers or staff, they come into the central office, but to me, I'm clueless about how it works.
They're coming in through Marty Goodell, who's the school board deputy clerk.
Deputy clerk.
With the search firms, have you all been exploring whether any of them specialize in school districts like ours? Because I think we actually are very fundamentally different from Fairfax and would want people who know how to evaluate candidates for districts like ours.
So they covered that in their presentations. I mean, VSBA is the Virginia School Boards Association. They've filled about half of the overall spots across Virginia. And I don't know that there's anybody that's exactly like us, but there's certainly smaller school districts. And looking at the records of both of the other two, if you go to a commercial firm, it may be more likely a larger school district. But I remember BWP's list had a lot of similarly situated school systems. So I think they've all done searches very much like, well, at least equivalent size to ours.
And to add to Phil's, at least one of them did mention the fact that they thought we were unique in our size, in our academic achievement, and a number of things. So at least they did some homework to sort of realize that we might be a little, or we are a little different from other school districts, comparing urban to rural communities, comparing small to large, and so that discussion came up in the presentation.
I'm wondering what qualities the two of you are looking for in a new permanent superintendent, and what kinds of questions you might be asking in your interviews of those candidates.
So I can't, on the permanent piece, I don't want to say this is what I think the community ought to want, because there's going to be an engagement process to determine what that is. I will tell you what matters the most to me is a community builder, a good communicator, somebody, this is the highest touch place I've ever lived, and I think it is hard to be successful here if you're not a high touch person. So I want somebody that can come out and talk to everybody and be a builder. A uniter, not a divider.
Did I mention that we were thankful that you were here? Yes.
Hi. Will the school board be hosting any town halls to get community feedback on what we're looking for in a superintendent?
That's the whole point of the community engagement.
Okay.
And we actually categorically asked them. That was for me.
And the
That
search
was
firms had to-
exactly for me. The search firms and reviewing them, I sort of focused on how much time, effort do they want to put into the community engagement, because we made it clear they will hear from the community, and so we asked, how much time, how many days. I mean, I heard one say 1 day, and I said 1 day. This community, they said no, it'll be at least 2 days or more if needed. So we made sure that's a big criteria for who ends up getting the job.
Yeah.
One thing that concerns me is references, and I would like to know how the school board is going to be certain that a candidate has been extensively vetted and references checked and all stones unturned. Overturned.
I don't know how to answer that question in advance, Melissa. I'm sorry that
Okay.
I've hired a lot of people in my lifetime. I suspect Michael has done the same. I can't speak for the rest of the board. I know some of them have. Checking references is something that you always do. For a school superintendent, you also do a background check. Both of the commercial search firms express their ability to do deeper vetting and get background on people because they're former superintendents and their networks know these people than you would typically get from picking up the phone and calling a person. So I think we'll take reasonable actions to do that, but it's reasonable actions, best efforts. I think it's important to certainly check references, but you also I think you can often get a feeling through the interview process what kind of people are.
Yes.
Yes, is anyone on the school board, were they there during the last meeting? So I was just wondering if reaching out to people maybe who were there and kind of after you hire them and then looking back on it, it's hard hiring people, it really is. And then looking back on it and trying to learn from that, I think is.
That's a good point. I would say that Joan Wadiska, who was the chairman of the school board the last time around, wrote an extensive letter to the board that described everything that they did last time and what the process was, and that's very helpful. And I expect that we'll have some face-to-face discussions with Joan and other people who are on the board at the time.
Yes, that's come up in our discussions, and we all agree to reach out to Joan and like you said, a couple of the other former who still live in the former school board members who live in the city to help us with that process.
Steve, in the back?
Hi. I'm trying not to be too abrupt, but, so it seems to me that we want a superintendent that fits in with the general mojo of the community and what Falls Church is relative to other places. So it seemed that the issues that I've been hearing about and seeing relate a lot to the training that the superintendents get and where they train and where they get their degree and where they get their, their way of doing things. And I want to make sure, is there a way to make sure that when you're looking at the superintendent candidates, that you're looking at those type of characteristics and personality shaping events in their lives. So there, because there are different schools where you get ED degrees, or different schools where you get MD degrees, different schools where you get PhDs, and so forth. So when you look at the school where they came, or where they were taught before, or where they were superintendent before, you can get a sense of where their makeup is and how they're going to be. Is that going to be? Is that too high? You know what I'm saying? I really want to make sure that you want to have someone that will fit in, and it seems that from what I've heard, because I haven't paid a lot of attention to it, but now that I'm kind of getting along with this, I feel that that's an important characteristic, and it seems to be something that was an issue in the past.
Okay. So I said, academic qualifications is a part of any hiring process. I think it's just one of the things that you look at. I think you can generally tell more about a person by talking to them and asking them questions about the way they really are than by seeing maybe what school they went to or any of those sorts of things. But it's something that you look at, and I think the right way to handle that is to ensure that we put in, the community ensures that it puts in, as the description is written of the portrait of the superintendent, what are the characteristics we want of that person. If one of them has a strong academic background, then a lot of people will say strong academic background. If it'll be open communicator, then we'll put in open communicator. And those are the things that we'll need to look for.
I saw one question here, then one question there, and then we're going to move on to the next topic, so I can.
Forgive me if you've already answered this. When do you expect to choose the search firm? Like, is that something y'all are looking to do this week, next week? You're not sure?
I'd like to do it tomorrow, but I don't.
But there
there's no
hasn't been a
set
meeting
timetable
called
for any
to
of
make
those
your
things.
vote, or
Yeah.
okay.
Sorry.
Yes.
The point has been raised a couple of times about making sure that the candidate fits in with our community and that it's a hands-on community and we're a special community, and we all acknowledge that. And it seems to me, I've said this to some people before, but we can have a superintendent that we mold to our community, or we can have someone who has molded to our community and trained to be a superintendent. Have we considered the idea of drafting Ty Bird, who I think is universally revered for the position that he held? I could be wrong, but I just thought he was terrific. And, I just wonder if anybody's giving that consideration, because he can be trained to do whatever it is superintendents do.
I'll second.
I can just do that for him.
And I think Arlington wants to do that.
We're invested in him, and if
That's
he
up to
brought
him,
in
though.
tomorrow, he would still know all our kids'
Did he
names.
apply? Yeah.
So I'm not going to comment on any particular candidate. What I would say is that it's an open process. There'll be an ad, anybody can apply, and Ty would be welcome to apply, like, anybody around the country. And I think we need to consider all the candidates that came up.
Send them an email.
Trust me, there are, I and the other school board members have heard lots of input already on who ought to be the permanent superintendent. As you said, it's a high-touch community, and I hear you.
All right, I'm going to move us along now to budget and finances. I think I opened the floor to Michael on the first topic, so I'll open it to Phil. And maybe to piggyback off of the superintendent search, we can talk about how the process will work in terms of timing and who will be crafting the budget this fall and winter. And if there's been any discussions about what the projected increase might be or how that will be determined.
So the first time this came up, really, not the plan. The plan's come up before, but the numbers started to come up at the last meeting. I think the current projections from the city were 2% budget growth, and the initial set of needs, not cut down or done from the school administration, was about 10%. And we had a similar delta last year. We're just in a really difficult position this coming year because we had the spike in enrollment, and we don't know what's going to happen next year. All of the development, well, I haven't yet seen the Kieran Sharp chart to know where those kids are coming from and whether it's development or single-family homes. But we should get that within the next few weeks, I think. We're trying to start the process a lot earlier. In fact, we got our first look at what the asks were from all the buildings on Tuesday of this week, and you can get that document on board docs if you want to see what it is. We have to just balance it. We're going to try to front load the process and get everything done much sooner so there's time for community engagement. We haven't yet decided what it looks like. I will tell you what my preferred process is, and what my preferred process is to take whatever the city tells us what we ought to put in, and then we put in a budget for that amount, and then we give them a second budget and say, if you gave us more, this is what we would do. Now, that first budget then is going to be what the budget is if the city council gives us the guidance, which I think in this case is going to be significantly larger class sizes, but we'll have to see what we can do, and the programs will be out there for people to take a look at. And I just think I don't want to do what we did last year, which was going through and figuring out how many pieces of chalk not to have, and whether the discussions about copiers, which I sort of started. If you're talking like $5,000 a copier, that's the degree of detail we got into to try to skim the budget down to places. And you can say I feel free in talking about the city because the city council has 5 people here and none of them can say a thing. It's a meeting if they do. And so I recognize we've all talked. And, the growth in the city, in my opinion, affects the schools more than it does the city because the school costs grow with the number of students, and the city costs grow with the number of residents, and our students' population is growing far faster than our resident population. So that's the reason why you see increased amounts from the schools. But we've got to work through it. I'm very committed to trying to not have an adversary process with the city council this time. We're all in this together. We all want good parks. We all want bike lanes. We all want traffic barriers, and we want good schools. So I don't see any reason, despite the fact, I'm going to be an advocate for more money for the schools, but it's not personal, and I don't think the people on the city council are evil people for saying you've got to have less. We've just got to have a real, open, collaborative discussion to figure out what our city's needs are and what we can afford, and whether that's larger class sizes or a speed bump. And I'm not trying to minimize the traffic calming measures. I live on a street, a lot of you live on streets where it's like Mayor Charter lives next door to me. Little Falls is a speedway during traffic, commuting times in the morning and evening. And Columbia Street's the same. So, one spoken.
The more things change, the more they stay the same. It's the same thing, and I've done this for 3 years, and Yeah, last year was painful, and I would I would like to avoid last year. I don't think I personally can go through this issue of nickel and diming where we're looking to save $500 here and $200 there. That was extremely painful. So the idea is we're having, at least I know, having conversations individually with members of the city council, try to let them know in advance, what our needs are, but also recognizing, like Phil said, it's what it is. And unless we all want to pay more taxes, some of us may want to, or we have to decide between, like you said, 27, 28 kids in the classroom, or ponying up a little bit more to get the quality that our kids have had in the past and deserve. So it's a balance. I'm glad my city council fellow members are here. They're hearing it, and maybe they'll hear from you as to what you would like to see. But the idea is to work with them earlier, more collaboratively, to come to some agreement as to where we want our schools to be.
So as a somewhat casual observer of the budget process last year, who also in my day job is responsible for building and implementing budgets and having those kind of negotiations with my own board, one of the things that was very confusing to me was who in the system of our school budget building has autonomy to make choices about those line items? Is it central office? Is it building principals? Is it school board? And do you see that? I don't know where it was last year. It was very confusing to me. Do you see a clear path for that this year? Because where I sit, I would be much more comfortable with the principal deciding and saying, hey, I'm trading off 27 kids in a classroom, which I personally would not be a fan of, for something else, than I would be someone who's not as close to the ground of running that school, because every principal might make different decisions in their own buildings.
Go ahead, take it first.
I
think, at least my understanding, or the way I've known it to work, is principals bring their budgets to the superintendent, or at least the central office, and then between Hunter, our CFO, and the superintendent, you sort of call it together and then arrive at something. Some decisions, I believe, obviously bring their needs, and then, is this a wish? Is this a want? Is this a need? And then things are cut down to size to fit what guidance we, the school board, provide to them, based on hopefully what we get from central government. But that's how it works. But then we then get a chance to sort of go through those items line by line and say, what is it? Is this really a need? Is this, obviously with information provided by the administration, as to what, if we see an item and we think, is this extravagant? Why is this getting this? Why is this other school not getting that? We'll ask the questions, and we recognize that different schools have different needs. Here we are, and we've been hearing it all since school opened about paras and part-time support staff for the kids, which is heartbreaking. But again, it was a result of last year's budget. We couldn't fund some of the things that we would love or we're used to funding. So we work through those, and at least my understanding is when we see, we'll question it, but we largely look at them and are responsible for making the decisions around them.
So, were you asking the question about building the budget or about authority to reallocate funds in the budget?
Well, both, because I think it's a two-way process, right? So the budget sounds like principals submit, central office then does what it does with the numbers, gives it to you guys, and then you ultimately do what you do with the numbers and make the ultimate decision. Whereas a different process might be, you guys say, here's the amount of money each school has, principals go figure out what to do with it, and we just want to look at it to make sure there's no funny business going on, right? Those are just two totally different ways of building a budget. And then there's the secondary part of that, which is what happens if things change 6 months later, right? Because budgets are built far in advance, and you're actually using them.
Okay.
I guess sometimes we have to, I don't want to say we have to step in, but for instance, last year, I think there was an issue of where especially MEH and GM have, 8th graders taking certain courses and 10th grade, especially with the NYP, Middle Years Program, which overlaps the two. Sometimes, there was an issue of funding, and so I think a teacher slot was moved from the high school into I remember there was some overlap which required us redoing the allocations between the middle school and the high school. So it's sort of hard to hand a budget. It's not always as easy to hand a budget to a principal and say, here's your bucket, figure out whatever you want underneath it when it impacts another part of the system. So that would be an example of something why we sort of have to sit up there.
I mean, I think it's mostly handled because it's as a matter of discretion, in the sense that you have to respect what your principals want, and the central office has the primary responsibility of sort of looking through that and then giving us a set of recommendations. But we see all of the asks from the principals. We see, all of them. I would think we see almost all of the asks from the principals, and we decide as a board where we want to put investments. And we have to do that because we're the ones who are responsible to the community. For example, the last year, it was, despite the fact that we had to not get all of the teachers that we wanted, we cut in other places and we stuck something in that was not in the superintendent's budget, which was a half a gifted specialist for TJ, because that population had grown so much over the years and it had stayed at one gifted specialist, Heidi Lang, forever. And so there was a decision in the board to add that and a few other things. So that's kind of what we do. In terms of the reallocation, it's really complicated. I'd have to go back and look at the rules. It's the central office, the superintendent, has a significant amount of discretion, which I think then tiers down to the principals to reallocate funds when they're in big buckets. The big exception, and there are ceiling amounts, and I'd have to go back and look what they are in terms of how much you can move from one pot of money to another. But it's not as tightly bound as, say, the federal government is, in which I've worked for years. However, movement of contingency funds from contingency to a real use requires specific approval from the school board. So I think that's one of the things that I actually want to look at in terms of what the limits are and whether they're set in the right way. But there's only so many hours in the day, and I haven't gotten to that yet.
I saw Brian and then Monica.
I appreciate the comment about better communication between the school board and city council. That has been, in my opinion, an embarrassment for years in the city that needs to get worked on. However, I'm concerned if the mindset to that collaboration is to allow the city council to say, we think that your budget should be X because we don't want to raise taxes by Y, and therefore we start to shape school budgets and the work of the school board based on budget direction from city council, which does not have the expertise or commitment or sort of day-to-day pulse on what the schools need. And so I just want to voice my sort of concern and emphasis on, to me, the school board is responsible for making sure that we have a school system that lives up to the standards of the community, which is a vague statement, but it is what it is. And to me, the community and the city exists at its core to have this high-quality school system. If we find ourselves in these cycles of trying to adapt our school system to the perception of what the tax rate can be by city council members, rather than the opposite, which is the tax rate should reflect the needs of the school system, which go up dramatically when the school population goes up dramatically, which is primarily driven by single-family home turnover, which we cannot control through economic development or anything else. That is a big problem, and I think that will be it's a nuanced way of looking at it, but I think if we find ourselves chasing a tax rate, lower tax rate, that's a bad mistake, particularly coming from the school board.
So, Brian, I don't disagree with you. I think it's just a question of how you get there. I think the schools ought to say, here's what we need, but I think, based on my experience from the last year, I think we need to give the city council an option that if you give us guidance money, that is, if you don't increase taxes or you give us what we are, this is how we're going to spend it. Because otherwise you get in what we were last year, where we're trying to cut things after the fact. All I'm saying is, if we have to live within guidance, let's figure out in advance what those are, so the city council can legitimately make a decision whether it wants to fund what the schools need or what the flat growth curve of the city would support. And it's their responsibility to say how much money the schools get. And I want to make sure that they've got the information to be able to make that decision. Neither Michael or I can make it. And I think it's better if the choices are clear and made in advance, because then, you'll know that, it's 27 teachers or 29 teachers at TJ for next year. All I'm saying is, figure out in advance what you're gonna do if you've got the straight line item budgets, and then give the city council a real choice so that they can make the political choice that they've been assigned the responsibility to make on whether they're gonna give you that money. But I don't wanna suggest, and I don't mean to suggest that we would cut the schools to meet an arbitrary number. I'm saying that if we're given a number, that we say, this is, if we're given that number, this is how we spend it. But then you have a second choice, which is like I don't know, you call it a silver budget or a bronze budget or whatever you want, but here is what we need, here's what we think we need. So now you have the choice, this many or this many, your choice.
Yeah, I was just gonna add on to that. I think that makes a lot of sense, because I think what you're saying, like us ending up in this last minute where we're all trying to make these very difficult choices in a matter of 4 weeks is very challenging. So kind of to do it up front and have everybody understand that if we don't get funded this amount, this is what our schools will look like, or if we don't get funded this amount, this is what our schools will look like. And probably have this discussion with the high school in just a bit, but I think what's driving all this is the fact that we know the high school is looming, and that's gonna be X amount on our tax rate, and then we have to pay for all of this. But in terms of creating those different budgets, I wonder, kind of to the point about more input from the principals. I mean, I've heard teachers say last round, if you could just get us teachers in a room, we could find a way to do this in a way that would work. And I hear that all the time, and so I feel like I don't know if there's like a little focus group they can nominate teachers to put them in a room and say, okay, this is a gold standard budget, this is our wish list, but if we are forced to do this kind of budget, get a group of teachers from Mount Daniel, MEH, and say, if you had to cut 8% or you had to live with an 8% budget, what would it look like? And have you all kind of be part of that process, because that's what I felt like was missing, was lack of principal input, lack of teacher input, and I hear it constantly that they said, we knew if we have some difficult choices to make, but we may have some ideas, and I didn't feel like they were being heard.
So, Michael, do you want to?
Well, all I'd add is, I believe that process happens at the superintendent level, and I guess she collates all of that and feeds it to us. Maybe it's not transparent to us, so we don't have the principals coming to us to sort of talk to us, but we do go out, at least to hear from, we did last year, went out individually to all the schools, and we were all assigned a couple of, I think you and I went to GM, and heard from the teachers, about what maybe it's a wish list at the time, but which has to be put in. But yes, we tried to reach to go out and listen to what they want to tell us, or what some of their needs are, and bring that to the table.
I'm just like suggesting a more formalized, like put people in a room and say, how would you create this budget if you had to create a budget that you had to be at 6% tax rate or whatever it is, like the silver standard budget. But
I hear you, Mike, and so we do have a data point on this now. So one of the questions on the survey that was given to the professional staff in the schools was about that, and it was clear that teachers didn't feel that they had an adequate voice. So we've got to have some changes to address that, whatever it is. As Michael said, we did go around in groups of 2 and meet with any of the school teachers that wanted us to. But I'd also say that there is. I'm not so sure that if you got a full spectrum of teachers from all the different schools, you'd agree. I mean, we saw this in the last year where the opinion of the Mount Daniel teachers was different than everybody else. They said, we'd rather have another teacher. The rest of the teachers said, we think it's important to have some salary raise to deal with the fact that inflation and all of that sorts of things, cost of living is going up. So we do have also, we hear from the teachers through the PAC, which Michael sits on, which is the Professional Educators Advisory Committee. So we've got mechanisms to do that, but we've got to improve them. I don't necessarily know what that looks like yet. I don't think a town hall of teachers is the way I'd solve it, but I'd be happy to think through what's the right way to make sure we do it, and we've got to have open communication channels, because that's the big thing.
So there's a lot of questions. We're going to do 1 or 2 more on budget and finance. I'm trying to give people who haven't yet had a turn. But I see all of you, don't worry.
Thank you. So here's a question I have. It actually connects back to the prior topic a little bit. In terms of the search firm, are they being paid a retainer? How are they being paid? And how are they being compensated? Is it based on the teacher's salary? Because I've hired search firms before, and they each work a little differently. How are these firms being compensated?
Well, I think the proposals are different from each one, but I think it's a fixed price plus expenses. So it's not based on the salary of the person hired.
Yes.
I just have a question. Is the data center still in George Mason? And if so, have we thought about getting rid of that and having hosting in the cloud?
I'll let Phil can answer.
I think Michael knows where I'm getting this question from.
Yeah, I mean, before he goes, because he's a tech guru on the board, but at least we asked and got that process started with, and what we had hoped, or I had hoped, and I'm a layman here, would be what I call an IT audit. And said, my analogy was, the finances are audited every year. So with technology, the laptops and all, and the little that I know about technology, which is not much, people hacking into stuff, could we at least maybe on a 3-4 year cycle review what we have to make sure these are robust enough, it's got all the controls and all of that, you know, and I know just enough to be dangerous. But with Phil's support, we got a firm to come in and did what we had hoped they'd do more than they did. Again, it's money. So we were able to start what I consider to be, we were able to do what I consider to be the start. I think there's a little bit more left, and Phil can add to it in terms of they tested the, was it access? What was tested? Network access.
They looked at a bunch of different things.
You look at a bunch of different things, but I think there's a little bit more to be done, especially in regard to your question about, does everything stay here within the city? And my personal question was, should we have some redundancy outside? Should something happen? But I'll leave it to Phil because he understands that.
There's no quick answer to that question. I don't actually know what they've got in the data center in George Mason. I know there is a data center because there was a line item request on that thing we got Tuesday night for putting a fire suppression system in the data center. And it's not cheap. So, you know, I'm a big believer in putting things in the cloud, as you said, when you can. I think there's a lot of ways to reduce costs by doing that. I'm not yet competent to say whether it's possible to move particular applications and whether you could get rid of, you know, an on-site data center right now. But I think where you're going is the right place to be.
I can tell you the data center is at Mason with a backup downstairs at Henry's. Mariana Henry's. Because I walked through it. I met at the last VSBA meeting, I met a gentleman who's been appointed by the governor to deal with technology and education, and sort of invited him over here, hoping maybe there'd be some money from the state. But at least he came over and we walked down with the IT guy, Rick Jowers, and that's when I learned where the stuff was at Mason, because I walked in there with them, and then I said, so where's the backup? And he walked us across to Henderson and was down there. That's, you know, part of the discussion about why is it all on one campus? You know, something happens. So.
Okay, DJ, last question on budget.
On the data center issue, I didn't even know we had a data center. But, I mean, I think it would be very beneficial to do a cost-benefit analysis on how much does it cost to run, maintain, and keep the data center in-house versus putting it into the cloud. I don't know if that's in the budget item or how that works, but I think that's something that I've seen in corporate environments where it's saved a lot of money, and I'm talking serious money.
The other thing I would like to do is go to Chromebooks instead of all the Apple stuff. Save a lot.
Hey, Eric, can I ask one more budget question? Like, are you going to communication next?
No, I'm going to school facilities.
Well, this is a budget.
I know, but everybody's question is important to them. So I have the hard job of moving us forward.
That's fine.
If we have time at the end, we'll come back to it.
That's fine.
Okay.
That wasn't really a budget question.
So school facilities, I think now it's Michael's honor to riff first on that, and I'll just throw out some possible discussion points: the Mount Daniel project, the Fellows property, the Madison playground property behind here, the current condition at George Mason High School, and the future of George Mason High School. We have
Can I leave now?
20 minutes.
Oh, I don't know where to start. Let's start on a positive note. At least with Mount Daniel. We can all say we're excited about that, and with the support of a lot of people in this room, the city council members, folks who came over to the community, to Fairfax County to speak on our behalf. So we're very grateful for that. It doesn't get us everything we wanted, but it got us some, if not most of what we wanted. Anyway, having gotten that out of the way, I think our next big, the elephant in the room, and the 14 of us, including city council members, have been meeting, we've had a couple of meetings, and hope to have another one soon, about that project and how we move that forward. You know, we sort of lost some time with the other process, and so we're sort of recalibrating or trying to get back and regroup to move that forward, because yes, especially with the last rain that happened, 2 weeks ago, you know, I guess it was a case of how many buckets or how many trash cans could be stacked around GM. But we're moving as fast as we can on that. And then these are the issues that have come up. We've had a couple of presentations. I guess we tried to let the community know through our school board meetings that I don't want to call them analysis, but you know, studies or a few sketches of diagrams at Fellows property and also at what's the name of the park? Madison Park. They're just a follow-on from, obviously, when we were in that period, or at least my understanding is when we were in the limbo for most of this year, when we weren't sure where Mount Daniel was going to go, we were obviously considering other options and looking at whatever we could look at. So these were more, let's see what this would look like if we had to. We've made no decisions. We've just got a little more information than we had before. And so in the event any of them were to pan out, and a lot of these started just before we got the Mount Daniel decision. It's not to say we'll put them all to bed, but at least we recognize that there may be some options which may not look as good. In fact, the issue of the concept of micro schools has come up, where all of these could maybe fit 1 or 2 grades, but the question is that what, as a community, the discussion to be had, you know, and I won't name the school board member who raised this, but the idea was we should think more about, do we want micro schools? Do we want a bigger school? What big tough decisions do we have to make about how we acquire land to do this? So these are very technical discussions, but they're also very long-range discussions that I guess ongoing school boards now and city council have to work together to figure out what's our vision for that sort of thing. So the facilities, you know, plus it costs a lot of money. You know, see what we're doing with. I think about the high school, and I go, we've been trying to do this for years, long before my time, and probably will go on up, you know, long after I'm gone. So, in a roundabout way, I guess what I'm trying to say is we're looking at a lot of different things. We can take them one at a time and look at each timeline. GM being the big one. Now that we've got my Daniel out of the way, but you know, it's an ongoing discussion, and we'll keep going. I know the city council is doing a lot of work now about sort of funding the CIP and because they know this is coming. So it's something that we're all doing, all 14 of us, if I can put it that way. Thoughts?
Maybe it'd be better to do questions. Mount Daniel was the first priority. The next thing we've got to get done is the high school, because that's the biggest issue in the size of MEH. So it's got to be a George Mansion renovation or construction and MEH expansion. And then shortly after that comes the question of what do we do about elementary schools expanding, because even with a grade moving back to Mount Daniel at the new size is not a permanent 3-grade solution, it's a 2-grade solution, which means we're going to need to have second grade back in TJ or some other elementary school at some point, which means there's going to need to be more elementary school facilities. And maybe that's 5 years out, maybe that's 10 years out. I mean, it all depends on how rapidly the city grows, so we've got to turn quickly to that. So I think on the high school, I can say nothing other than we need to make haste slowly. It's really important to do it as quickly as possible, but no faster. Because we've got to have community input, we've got to have a good decision, and I was not happy with the result of the LAPS process. I don't think it was a mistake to start it. I think it was the right approach when it was launched, but it turned out to not be a successful one. And so we've got to find the right way to figure out a solution that the community wants and can afford.
All the way in the back.
I wanted to ask, I know the George Mason School, we have to do something about it. But there is a concern right now with what's been happening with the rain and the buckets and the tiles falling on somebody's head, and we've all heard all those stories. And as a lot of us have kids that are either there or going there next year, what are the immediate steps that you're gonna take to deal with that crumbling infrastructure there? Before we decide to build a McMansion or move it or?
That's a tough question, Liz. I think historically the board had been trying to not overspend on maintenance because of the general intention to tear the building down at one point. So putting in, $10 million of HVAC doesn't make a whole lot of sense if it's going to be for a year or two and it's hard to move the stuff. I think we've come awfully close to reaching the point where we're not going to be able. We're going to have to do a significant amount of renovation, and so that may make the construction need a little less urgent. Although we're going to run out of space there too. But I don't have an answer for you yet. But to say that analysis has to be done, and if one of the things we talked about last year is we're close to total failure on the HVAC systems, particularly the boilers at George Mason, and that's not a little ticket item. I mean, that's in the millions, probably over 5 million. So that's going to be a big problem because there were several days last year where George Mason students were sitting there in winter coats in classes.
Mark.
We have a question about the elementary schools. So, and it's a couple part questions, but I'll try to make it quick. The current population of Mount Daniel, does anybody know that number right now? How many students are currently?
For 2 grades?
For the 2 grades.
I'd have to
It's
look back.
191 per grade.
So we're almost at 400.
Almost 400.
So we're almost,
Yeah.
that's what I thought. So if we have a capacity of 660 there, we know that we're gonna blow through that in a couple of years.
Yeah.
So for the three grades. So has there been thought on the school board about changing the plan from expanding Mount Daniel to just renovating Mount Daniel? And then looking at the Fellows property to make the TJ be able to maintain 2nd grade there? Because we're not gonna be able to go back and get more kids at Mount Daniel.
So, do you want?
Go ahead. While I gather my thoughts.
I'd say I don't think that's the great idea. I mean, I think we're going to need all the space we can. I don't think we can abandon Mount Daniel. So I think having space for 660 is better than having space for 400, even if it means we go back to a 2-grade solution. And I think enough has been spent on design. There's enough sunk costs in that I just want to complete that. It may not be the best option, but it gets us a few more years. And I don't think there's any way we're ever I don't think in the foreseeable future we're gonna get rid of Mount Daniel because the cost of rebuilding that would be so high.
I wasn't suggesting that at all, and I specifically said renovate it. Like, I'm not saying abandon Mount Daniel or anything like that. I think Mount Daniel is an important part of our community, but I just think I think that we all need to take a hard look that we didn't get what we wanted, and so that school is not going to serve the purpose that we all thought it was going to serve, and so is the money still meant to go to serve a purpose that it's not going to fulfill?
Here's my take on it. We didn't get what we wanted, and you're absolutely right. But the way I sort of reconcile what we requested and what we got, for me, is it sort of eases up the pressure on the cooker. Takes off the pressure a little bit. And I've been saying around in a funny way, tongue in cheek, that it gives us enough time to go do GM, you know, and then come back, by which time it'll be full, and then we'll tackle that again. But at least we get a few more years where we've got ADA issues, which have to be, which are sort of almost immediate. We've got sprinkler issues, we've got all these things that are, you have to do these things now. And then it also gives us, like you said, yes, it gives us just enough time or enough room to put up something a little bit more modern, with a little bit more community use, at least with the design that has been put there. So it's not optimal, but
if each grade grows by 20 kids,
I know.
we're back to 2 grades. So we just need, like, that's a realistic realization.
Not
that
to
we're
mention,
gonna grow by 20 kids by the time it's built.
not to mention we got some money, it's out there, the conditions attached to it, we have to do something with the money, or it's a complicated issue. And I think
if we keep growing 20 kids a year, then it's not going to be a 2-grade solution in 6 years. So I don't know what to tell you other than it is now shovel ready. You know, the dollars are there. We need the space, and we don't have any other options. So I get exactly what you're saying. I don't think it's unreasonable at all, but I just think the practicalities are we're going to do that expansion.
Monica, and then Mary Beth.
So on the high school, I mean, I think about it this way, that even in a perfect world, if everything, you know, went according to plan and we were able to get a bond on the ballot in November and everybody approved it and we were off and running on building that high school, it would not be ready for kids for another probably 3 years. And so what I'm hearing from the roof situation at George Mason and the HVAC, that the roof situation is buckets everywhere when it's raining, and that if you fix the roof, you have to take off the HVACs, which once you take them off, they're not certain if you ever put them back on, they would work again. So you almost have to do those in conjunction with each other. And so if we just think about what we need to do in 3 years, and then I personally don't think this is getting done in 3 years. To your point, I think that it's not going to make it to the bond referendum next November. I would hope it would, but I would think that the community would need a lot more selling and understanding before that we get there. So we're really talking 3 to 5 years. So it's kind of like you've said, we push these maintenance things, you know, off as long as we could. I think we just need to face the reality that we're going to have our maintenance folks give us a list of if it's a 3-year timeline, what do we have to fix today? If it's a 5-year timeline, and
is there a question?
How do you see it?
Can I give you a name? Does Wiedefeld sound?
What's that?
Or Wiedefeld? Come in and just shut a few things out. No, I'm just joking. But no, you're right. We need those kinds of decisions now where you go, all right, this block this has to be closed for maybe a couple of weeks so we can get this fixed, because otherwise we're spending $12 million tearing the whole thing down just to even it out. So yes, it's I don't want to say touch and go, but that's where we are. And you know, maybe we're all paying for the sins of not getting it done in the past, but we're at the point where we can't ignore it anymore unless we want rain pouring into the classrooms while the kids are sitting there into those mats that we spent money on. So it's a whole new topic.
I don't disagree with a thing you said. The only thing I'd add in addition is that if we then have to do that degree of renovation, what does that mean for the project, and do we do something different, which is, you know, an addition and a renovation as opposed to a replacement with development?
And we need to know those costs, because some people are suggesting those costs are on the order of 80-90 million versus, or I don't know. So we need to know those costs.
I am one of those people who don't think, I haven't been satisfied with the answers on renovation costs before.
I just want to wearing my school hat, I just want to make sure that everybody in this room knows that there are 2 open tours of George Mason next week.
Thank you.
The announcement ran in the morning announcements today. There's one on Monday at 6:15 and Wednesday at 6 o'clock. There's space for 20 people. I think there's still space left. So if you do want to see all those parts of George Mason that's spread out like a spider, please sign up for those.
Mary, can I ask her a question? Rules did we run anything in the Falls Church News Press on those tours? Because it seems to me we'd want community members who are against raising the taxes, who don't have kids in the school system, going on those tours. I mean, you're preaching to the choir here.
It
you
wasn't
know,
in the news
so.
press
It wasn't
today.
in the news press.
So I
And
mean,
it's
if we do,
next
maybe
week.
we do one
Yeah.
more round later on, but we do it for
Yeah.
the outside community who don't have
This is like the
kids.
beginning of, right, so this is anybody who wants to come, please come.
Right.
And there will be
Right.
more dates scheduled.
Okay.
Also, all those people are on the morning announcements list.
Okay.
So
I mean,
that goes out to a large group of people.
non-school.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, many non-school people get it, who are those people that think that there's not a problem.
Great, great, okay.
Steve, I saw your hand up.
So in terms of the money again and how much you have to spend and your budget and getting it cut. So in the news press, they're just talking about how Harris Teeter and all that is a big cash cow. And so we also have a couple, one other multi-use facility coming on board. And so with all that extra money coming into the city, and since the school is our primary purpose for being a city, it is the school district getting their substantial fair share plus of that money coming in.
All I can tell you is, we've been told that the guidance is 2% for next year. That could change, so
Are you planning for that? Are you planning in your budget so that you know, because we're a small enough city, can't the school board work together with the council and get more money?
So if I'll interrupt and say, the developments, as part of the developments, they made proffers of additional money for the schools for certain purposes, I believe. And I would say that that discussion should also include that discussion and those questions need to also be raised to the city council, because the school board, as they discussed on the budget section, is sort of dealing with the amount of money that the city council allocates to the school board. The question about how much money gets allocated is more of a city council issue.
And isn't the other important point that the operating budget is separate from the CIP budget? So like if you had to pay for HVAC and roof, that comes from capital improvement. It's not the operating budget, right? So it's a different budget. That comes from city council, right?
yes.
Right? Okay.
Well, I mean, I think we have input like we do in the main budget, but all of those budgets are approved by the city council.
You
A
should
couple
just be
comments.
getting-
One, I don't think we should count our chickens before they hatch in terms of what the news press has said we may realize in tax benefits from Harris Teeter. Lovely if it happens, but I don't know that we can count on it. My other question is, since we are in this kind of dreadful position with the high school, can we turn that building into an asset? Can we invest in it and turn it into an asset that we can use as our school population continues to grow? Could it become another elementary school? Could it, could it somehow to ease the pressure off the middle school? So if we invested, considerable sums in bringing it up to speed, then is it an asset that we can factor into the future? I think sometimes we make too many short-term decisions, and maybe an investment of money in the building that we have will stretch our possibilities.
Well, I think that was the idea of the commercial development there,
Yeah.
right? Was that would give us more financial return.
Yeah, but I think Marilyn's saying that investing in the building is
Yeah.
a more sure thing. It's a more
Right.
sure investment. You can
Because
say,
we
okay, we're
don't know.
putting this much money
If
in the
we're- if
building and
we're-
we're gonna use the building.
Exactly, if we're gonna put a new roof, if we're gonna put a new HVAC, if we're gonna doctor it up, then
Let's use
we
it
have
for
an
the
asset
schools.
that we can use.
And it's not mysterious.
Right, and it's not mysterious, and
All understood. What I'd say, go ahead.
No, I was in agreement.
The problem is, and I mean, obviously you can continue to do that if you invest in the building, then you're probably gonna continue to use it for high school, but what that precludes is any sale of the land, which would help you pay for a new building, or any commercial development, which would provide taxes that would help pay for continuing growth in operational costs and other city expenses. So that may be an option. I mean, I think if we renovate it, it's gonna stay at the high school and not need to be repurposed, at least for some term of years. And then that gives up the opportunity for commercial development. Yeah, and I'm sort of, while we're on this, I'm very conflicted on this subject, to tell you the truth, because I hate giving away any land that the city, or even selling any land that the city owns, because in retrospect, those decisions have been poor ones. They might have been right at the time, but wish we had the Whittier land now, or, the Madison School, and all of that. That would just be, it would be nice to be able to go back and do that. And those decisions are irrevocable in some cases if you alienate the land. But at the same time, of the land that's in the city that's commercially valuable, you got to think that that's the most. And when you look at what's there with Federated and Don Beyer, and you're looking at a huge parcel of really underused land, and there's nothing like that anywhere inside the Beltway that I'm aware of. And that's next to a metro station.
Yeah.
So it feels to me like we ought to have options that we don't. And I don't, I'm very pleased that our mayor is a land use attorney and knows these issues far better than I do, because I'm just a cyber guy.
One more question on this topic, then we're going to
I just
move
want
on.
to raise an issue. I mean, this will be the second renovation of George Mason. How long does the first one last? So if you do another renovation, how long is that going to last before another investment can have to be made? So you have to take that into consideration.
How long ago was that?
About 20 years ago.
Is that
Because
typical?
MEH was like
How
10 years
long?
ago, right?
Yes, 2005 is when it opened.
What was the renovation? What all
Oh,
was
they
done
did
20 years
They
ago?
had to get rid of all the asbestos, and they did roof repair.
All I'll add is that in our joint meetings, with the city council, we at least are looking for, I don't want to say to make the process transparent, but at least try to get a better handle on what would renovation cost and what would it look like. Compare that with a new, brand new school, and then say, all right, what are the costs? What are we giving up here, and what are we getting here?
Right.
To Phil's point, you renovate, you keep the footprint. Your options for commercial development are limited or next to none. If you get a new one, what does that mean? How do we get through it? What does it cost? And personally saying, all right, why don't we start with a number, a budget, and then see what we can get from the development community. That's my feeling. At least that's how I think it should work, because we can sort of run around and ask, but we also have to be able to afford it, and that's a big part of the equation. So I think it's come up in our joint meetings about, let's compare renovation to a design build or something new and see what the benefits are. Because to Dick's point, you're going to renovate, what's the economic useful life of that building? If it's going to last another 5 to 7 years, then what's the point if we're going to spend that kind of money?
If you haven't seen George Mason, take one of Mary Beth's tours. I mean, it is end of life. It's been around for a long time. It's in as good condition as a lot of the buildings where I went to high school, but it is not in great shape.
Okay, so now we will move to the last topic. We have a little bit less time, because I think we're pushing up at about 9:20, which is communications and trust, and how the school board and the school administration works with the greater community. I'll note off the top as my own personal opinions, that I think that great strides have been made over the last few months in terms of improving the communications that are coming from the schools and that are coming from the school board, and changing the tone, as Phil alluded to a little bit before. Maybe it wasn't, I think he was talking more in relationship to the budget negotiations, but changing from us versus them to how do we work together to solve these, and realize that there are differing opinions and probably no perfect answers. And I thought that would be a nice way to conclude and sort of tie all this together, because a lot of these themes really run through the issues of the facilities and of the budget and of the superintendent. And so I welcome any comments and questions on that.
Should this be more questions from?
I can
I would like to absolutely commend, and I have not read the whole article about Mr. Swanson today, but I attended one of his, I guess his first chalk track, the evening session, and it was a rainy evening. It was so warm and friendly, and we were able to have this kind of two-way dialogue with whatever kind of came up. It was phenomenal as a parent who's been here for a long time. Yeah, really good. It reminded me of like the principal's coffees, how they used to be when the kids were really little. And then I haven't had that for a while. And then the minute conferences, the parent mini conference at Mason. By the time my second graduated from Mason, I had finally figured out how to work the mini conference. But it is hard. But I'd like to say thank you for however that has come to be. And I don't know where the skepticism seems to grow from with other issues and angst. But I think it's part of it is just the high pressure place that we live, and it's a hard place to be. But there is still a lot of skepticism in the community about budgets. If we're not going to build a grassroots budget for the operating budget and be very transparent with how it looks in terms of functions and how it looks in terms of the building and the per student, how much we're getting, I think you're gonna still fight that battle with people in the community. We're all the same. We're gonna pick our council members and we're gonna pick our tax rate, and we're gonna continue to have these sort of painful, difficult debates over the money. So I feel like we need to do a grassroots budget development that addresses a lot of the issues that drive the skepticism, because there's trust about what's your money and how it's being spent.
How involved will the school board be in choosing the next director of technology? If you're considering big, like a move to Chromebooks or something else, that's Rick Jowers' job. Who is chosen and who makes the decision to hire what person may lock you in or out of options that you want to consider. And is the technology, I don't know if anybody here is on that technology advisory.
Yes, some of them are.
Okay. And does that group have anything to do with at least knowing the timeline? I don't think you can make budget decisions for next year until you have what your true technology thing is in place. And that person is very, very crucial to everything else that touches technology.
I completely agree, and I'll be the first to say I'm not sure where that process is, because I think Rick retires at the end of the year.
End of December.
End of December, right, end of December, so not the school year, sorry. So that's, thank you for that, but I guess we'll raise that. And but you make a good point. It is worth looking at. It's bigger than the IT director in a sense. So, and this is another hot button that is in the community about the technology. So I think that informs the hiring and all of that. We'll definitely take a look at it. We'll definitely bring it up.
So a couple of things. The school board, while it approves every employee, doesn't get involved in the hiring process except for picking the superintendent and then more directly approving the choices on the principals and sort of the senior leadership. We have to approve everybody that is picked, but for the most part, we don't have the time or the detailed interviewing pieces to sort of go in and individually pick that person. I'd say that it's not all that, well, I think Rick or whoever replaces Rick will be involved in that process. Actually, the choice of which device to use is kind of the one thing the technical advisory committee has been asked to do. or at least asked to opine on. There is a difference of opinion among the people on the committee whether they are being asked to do that or just rubber stamp the approval of Apple devices. I couldn't attend the first meeting. It's hard for me to speak to that. But just to sort of round out on that one, because I have gotten asked questions about it, there was a discussion in the school board when we did the priorities and work plan for the coming year about that. Not to air differences of opinion, but I wanted the purposes of the technical advisory committee to be broader than just picking a device, and I was not successful. So the actual priorities for the school board say that the technical advisory committee is to advise on choice of a device in time for the budget cycle, but that was a 5-1 vote.
I missed that. How are you not successful?
Because it was a 5-1 vote.
Five people voted
Oh, I'm sorry.
for just limiting it to Chromebook time.
Well, it wasn't specifically on that. It was whether to approve the work plan. And that was actually the reason I voted against the,
I see,
that was the decision
Part of
point
the
for me.
bigger
That I
vote,
wasn't
okay.
going to approve a technical a work plan, a priorities document that listed that as the purpose because I think a deeper examination of technology was required.
Yes.
I talked a lot, so I don't know if anyone else wants to talk, but Beth, go ahead.
So this goes back to the budget and kind of what Rahini said. So part of the, one of the issues last cycle was sort of a lack of transparency in the budget as it was presented to the community. There wasn't a list of actuals spending for 2015, and normally in a budget you see last year's budget, last year's actual, this year's proposed, and that wasn't the way. And so how is there a is there a plan to present things differently? Has the board requested a different presentation of the budget this year? And then my next question to segue into that is, if I wanted to know from the school board, how much do you all spend in, say, legal fees? What is the process that I go through to get that information from you all? Because it seems like right now, to get that kind of information, you have to file, whatever the word is. FOIA. And so what, if there are basic information that people are seeking, how do we get that information? What are we not allowed to see, but are there things that the school board is sort of reluctant to allow people to see, or what should be transparent from your perspective and what shouldn't?
And we always, Tom's not here anymore, so we have this, I guess we're missing this person, but I would typically refer to Tom and ask, what can or can they see? But I would have thought that, or my thought is the budget's it's a public document, and it's actually on the website. To your point, the presentation, if you're a numbers person and know where to look, it's easy. If you're not, it's a lot of numbers. I mean, I'll say I've been on it 3 years, and I think I'm just starting to understand the process, because the numbers can blow you away.
Right.
So, yeah, I hear you. It's not easy. I think there was one year, I'm not sure if it was the first year, or 2 years ago, when a book, we presented it slightly differently, or offered to present it slightly different. It was done by school and then each school would break it down to the teachers and all that. I'm not sure how well that was received, or whether that was a better format than the other one, and maybe we go back to that rather than the one you can print off the website, which is numbers. So
It's pretty, but
was that? I mean, I don't know if that was helpful, and maybe we need some feedback to thoughts.
Right.
I think people like both. I think people like summary level for those who want to look at it summary level, and I think then you need the full-blown, 3 years worth of actuals versus, and in Excel, so people can take it home and
They need to be searchable.
they need to be searchable.
There were images in the
Right.
lab, and you couldn't search anything.
Because people want to dig in and do their own analysis and then be able to ask questions. So I think having both is helpful.
Good feedback.
is it Fairfax that has the really great online one?
And Arlington has a really good one.
No, I know, but I mean, just as an idea, I mean, not saying that ours should be like that, but those are examples, other jurisdictions that,
To look at.
that's what, to consider.
As Michael said, all the budget stuff is public documents, and if it's, I think the school administration tries to publish all of that. If there's something that you want that is not there, I don't think you need to immediately send a FOIA request. You can just call up and Hunter will probably give you whatever he's got. They may want some things to be FOIA requests, but I would just, I'd pick up the phone and I'd call somebody or send an email to Hunter if you want a budget document. And if all that stuff's open, if I've got it, and I always ask for the stuff in Excel because I don't want to work with a PDF. I want to be able to play with the numbers, and so if I've got it, I'm happy to give it to you as well because you're entitled to it. I want to go back on the actuals piece. You're right. I mean, this is one of the things that I should have asked for much earlier, and I didn't think about it. I was doing too many other things. But we did get to the point where we wanted the actuals from last year. I think we've made clear, at least I and several other board members have made clear that on the initial run through for the next time around, we want to see a budget presented with the actuals, full year actuals from last year and year to date actuals from the current year. So I, like a lot of you, have done budgets before. Although the last time around, Monica helped me with a spreadsheet, or one of her friends helped me with it. That was just really great.
And if you need him again,
So we're all a community. There's no point in not having the data out and available so we can see what the analysis ought to be, and the numbers are open. They ought to be open. But sorry, I don't keep saying too many things. We are unable to do the stuff like Fairfax does. We've got one comms person.
Exactly.
There's Hunter, and he probably has a part-time person who works for him. I'm not sure how many people the rest of the staff, but it's all thin.
Right.
It's all very thin.
Bethany, and then if anybody hasn't asked a question yet, but has, one more opportunity before we wrap things up.
So I want to give y'all an appreciation for coming and having this dialogue. This is great.
Yes.
And just a point of reference as we're going forward for community engagement. So the city council did this wonderful thing where they had public comments and public sessions on planning. I forget what you're calling the plan for
Visioning?
the principals visioning process. And there was this nice long survey, which was awesome. And I always take surveys. And I couldn't make hide nor hair of half of the questions on the survey because it used very technical terms like calling properties by certain names that I don't know what that property name is, and there wasn't an address associated with it or an intersection. And so what I would just encourage you is to make sure that as you're going forward, especially around superintendent, using super plain language for those of us who aren't experts in the particular issue. I don't necessarily know the technical terms so that we can give meaningful. I actually wrote at the end of that survey, I'm not sure if I answered this correctly, because I didn't really understand half the questions. So I just encourage plain language for written stuff, but this is really great to have y'all here in person. Thank you.
Just one quick thing. Some of us blog. I'm trying to talk Michael into blogging in the future. Since I've actually been on the school board, I'm worse at it because I don't have as much time to blog as I used to. But I try. I have fallen on the job the last few weeks because I've been very busy. I try to answer every email I get. I am happy to show up at these things, so if you guys ever want me to come back, or if a group of people wants to meet for coffee, or just one person does, I'll try to make it work because I mostly work out at the home when I'm not in New York or London. So you just meet me. And
when I'm not in London working.
Trust me. It's better than Biloxi, but
that's where I go.
I just want to say, Rohini, thanks for the heads up with Mr. Swanson, and at least, we're getting some really good feedback from him, and yes, I mean, this last section was about communication, so I'm glad we're getting something right.
I see one more hand up.
Just to piggyback on both of those, I agree with you. I think from everyone I've talked to, teachers, parents, students, all thumbs up for Mr. Swanson. I think a big part of that is you had a very comprehensive interview committee comprised of PTA people, teachers, and so I hope that I know the search firm is going to be a big part of the superintendent, but I hope that when you all actually get to this, whatever the interview committee is, you do have some representatives from the community, PTA, what have you, teachers, because I think that was it was a huge interview committee, but I think that's why we ended up with such a great candidate. So.
And teachers get to pick their own.
So once again, I want to thank Michael and thank Phil for taking the time. came, our city council members.
Thank
you
you.
for coming.
City
To
council
everybody from the community, thank you for coming. I urge you to continue to be engaged and involved, whether it's through the Falls Church Way or on your own or through something else. There's lots of school board meetings coming up. The budget stuff is starting to happen already. Talk about next year's election will happen as soon as this year's election finishes. There's so much going on, and you can always email or write to your elected officials. We have a flyer that we're handing out on your way out. I think it has the school board calendar and school board emails on it. I had on my list the GM high school tours next week, but Mary Beth already covered that. There's also the joint work session coming up soon with the city council and the school board, talking about the planning for the high school campus. And while there's no city council or school board positions on the ballot in November, other than all those other important reasons to go vote in November, there is one local issue on the ballot, which is the bond referendum for the library. And don't forget that. And if you need more information about that, there are resources to find out more about what exactly the plans are and what the money is. And thank you again for coming.
Thank you.